It is NBA trade deadline day across the NBA. We've got you covered at Locked On Network with the very latest. A lot of moves happening right now. It's starting to become a little bit chaotic. I'm Kylen Mills. Happy to have you with us here as we are joined by Locked On Nets host Adam Armbrecht to break down. I mean, I don't even know where to start with the Nets, Adam, but first of all, I want to start with, I guess, the end of an era. Seeing finally what was supposed to be the super team broken up as Kyrie gets shipped off first. And then you kind of know at that point the dominoes will fall. Kevin Durant officially now a Phoenix Sun. What were your initial reactions first to those blockbuster trades?
Yeah, I think you kind of hit it on the head there. As soon as Kyrie Irving goes to Dallas, right, the negotiations fall down. He makes a trade request that seemingly blindsided the organization a little bit in terms of trying to still get across the finish line on keeping him in Brooklyn. But once that trade goes through, you do start to get the sense of, well, where does Kevin Durant stand? What conversations are happening? And in a lot of ways, the fact that we didn't hear anything for 24, 48 hours I think really started to give you the sense that while maybe the offseason's a better time for a move, I think Kevin Durant's probably pushing for it. Radio silence is usually a bad sign when it comes to KD. And now we find ourselves reflecting on the end of what wasn't, because one first round playoff victory. That's it. That is the resume for this iteration of the Brooklyn Nets. And then Sean Marks and Joe Tsai obviously started to move the wheels on beginning a rebuild after not achieving anything close to the ultimate goal.
I mean, it's just kind of crazy that those three only played 16 games together. Like that still is just mind blowing to me. But where does that leave the Nets now? You still do bring in Mikal Bridges, Cam Johnson. I know they just shipped out Jay Crowder, but they're finally kind of. It's funny the whole thing's coming full circle with now the Nets are getting so many picks back. But where does this leave the organization? What is the outlook moving forward?
Yeah, so they achieve one goal in replenishing their draft capital. You get 4 first round picks from the Phoenix Suns in exchange for Kevin Durant, also a pick swap there as well. But you're really talking about looking down into 27, 28, 29, when potentially those picks become viable at the top end of the draft. So it's valuable to do so, but you do have to look at the players. And even going back to the offseason, all the speculation was the Brooklyn Nets did not want to fall off the map if this era ended with Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving, James Harden as well, if you want to include him. So getting back Mikal Bridges really does matter. Cam Johnson really does matter. We've seen the emergence in recent games of Cam Thomas. We know the development of Nicholas Claxton. They also brought back Spencer Dinwiddie from Dallas, along with Dorian Finney-Smith. I think, there's still potentially some moves to come here, but they do have a core of talent that is a playoff team in the Eastern Conference. Can they win a playoff series? I wouldn't put a lot of money on that right now, but I think it was important for Brooklyn to not become one of the bottom dwellers in the Eastern Conference going forward. And now they have a lot of capital potentially to make a move, in the short term or in this offseason going forward.
Yeah, you mentioned the potential for there to be some additional moves. Are you thinking maybe more fringe pieces, or what do you think the Nets want to accomplish here, even in just the next couple hours, and then maybe this offseason, whatever doesn't get done right now?
Yeah, so the first piece is the Kyrie Irving trade and getting back Dinwiddie and Dorian Finney-Smith. In theory, that move was meant to bring in some complementary pieces in an effort to retain Kevin Durant here. So now you say, well, Spencer Dinwiddie, certainly a viable point guard. You need a ball handler. I think Dorian Finney-Smith remains, but then you go back to the offseason move, bringing in Royce O'Neal from Utah for a first-round pick. There is some redundancies here. So I would expect Royce O'Neal potentially to be on the move. If they can shed the contracts of a Joe Harris, a Seth Curry, those are other names as well. Even a Patty Mills, veteran guard who's just been kind of buried with relatively low minutes. I think they'll just try to maximize every bit of capital they can get out of this without sacrificing any of the young players. And frankly, that's what held up the potential move to bring in Pascal Siakam from the Toronto Raptors, was that it's centered around getting Nicholas Claxton to Toronto, something that Sean Marks was unwilling to do, which could be reflective on the capital they gave up to get James Harden, seeing a lot of young, homegrown talent exit the building.
Yeah, and you kind of bring up that, and to that point, what has been the feeling amongst the fans? Like, are people, really pointing the finger after this and saying, look, now you just mentioned kind of the young talent going. Now the big three didn't work out that we brought in, just kind of what is the fans' reaction to all this?
Yeah, there was already a general groundswell from a large portion of the fan base that Sean Marks is not the man for this job. He's been blundering the superstar era. Now, before they brought in the superstars, he's also the architect of trading assets and building capital and making an attractive franchise to get Kyrie and Kevin Durant. So, in theory, he is a good GM to have in place to execute a rebuild or a pseudo rebuild. But there's a large fan base that wants this team sold. They want Joe Tsai gone. They want Sean Marks gone. And then I think there is a segment that remembers the pre superstar era with D'Angelo Russell, Spencer Dinwiddie, Jared Allen, Karis LeVert. And they were a plucky, fun kind of, playing for the playing game, maybe making some noise in the playoffs. And there is at least some sense of relief around the expectations for championships are gone, but at least you don't have this angst around, is this team ever going to fully put it together? You mentioned just 16 games with that big three. Kyrie Irving missed 55% of his games through a series of reasons. Don't have to reflect on whether or not he's responsible for those scenarios. It just wasn't anything that ever came together. So I think there's mostly a collective sigh, but there is an enormous level of frustration. Many looking at the trade with Phoenix and saying that's not nearly enough for Kevin Durant and what they're going to be able to accomplish potentially out west.
Interesting. So people aren't happy about what the Nets received in response to that Durant trade, the additional picks and all that.
I think it's in tandem. One, you're not getting back in theory a guy that's a superstar, but
Right.
players can ascend, right? So that's the first problem. You're not replacing a commodity with a commodity. And I think it'd be foolish to assume you would. But the other
Mhm.
part is how far out that draft capital is. They're not going to be in the lottery picks here. The teams that they're getting capital from are going to be high level competitive. So in the short term, you're still sending out your first round pick to Houston. Maybe you try to finagle a way to get some of that back. But that's, I think, the biggest level is fine. You may have made the best sort of out of the worst situation, but we know the answer, the solution could be 3 or 4 years down the road in terms of getting back to competing for championships. And if you lump that in with this era, that means it's a decade without feeling like you're back in those waters. Time, I think, will alleviate some of that stress and getting to see some of these players on the court. We don't know what these rotations are going to look like yet. And I think the fans will really appreciate what Mikal Bridges and what Cam Johnson and this unit actually can bring to the court on a night in, night out basis.
All right. Well, it will be exciting to see exactly what the Nets put out there and what the product is on the floor when that comes to fruition. Our Locked On Nets host, Adam Albrecht, thanks so much for being with us. For more on the NBA trade deadline, find your local Locked On show and subscribe to Locked On NBA for the very latest Locked On Your Team every day.